In this lecture, we're going to get started on writing hooks. The question is, where do we add functions? So far, we have a single PHP file. Unfortunately, this file will never get loaded. WordPress will prioritize the templates/index.html file as the template for the home page. The question becomes, where do we define our theme's logic? In the programming world, we have a concept called separation of concerns. It's a simple concept. Writing code can be challenging if you're writing it in a single file. To keep things tidy, it's recommended that we separate our code into different files. This idea of splitting code is called separation of concerns. You've already experienced this type of principle with HTML and CSS. Most developers will separate their CSS into different files. Not only does it keep the HTML file small, but it allows the CSS to be reused in different HTML files. WordPress will help us with keeping our code clean by allowing us to separate our theme's template and logic. WordPress recommends a different file for adding hooks. Inside the theme folder, let's create a file called functions.php. The functions file is a special file. It's completely optional. However, WordPress will automatically load it if defined in your theme. Therefore, anything written inside this file will be executed on every page request. Double check to make sure the file name is called functions.php and not function.php. In the past, students have forgotten to include the letter S in the file name. Let's discuss the differences between the functions.php and index.php files. The functions file can be thought of as the logic for our theme. It's different from the index template. The job of the index template is to display content to the user unless an index.html file is available, whereas the functions file doesn't have to render content. Instead, it allows us to run code behind the scenes. We can do things such as query the database, register style sheets, process forms, check tokens, etc. It's considered good practice to separate our content from our logic. Otherwise, our code base could get bloated. We will be writing the logic for our theme in the functions file. Inside this file, we're going to add some comments to document our code. First, let's add some PHP tags. I'm not going to close the PHP tag. The entire file will contain PHP code. There isn't a reason to close the PHP tag if we're not going to add HTML. We'll be writing a lot of code. It would be a good idea to organize our code into sections. Let's add some comments. The first section will contain variable declarations. The second section will contain include statements. The last section will contain our hooks. If this looks confusing, don't worry. As we progress through the course, each section will become clear. I'm adding these sections ahead of time for organization reasons. Keep in mind, it's optional to structure your file like this. This is how I structure files and how I recommend you do it. Before we continue, let's test if WordPress is loading the functions file. At the top, we'll output a message with the echo statement. Normally, we wouldn't write this line of code. The functions file should not output content. However, it's for testing purposes, so it's perfectly fine. Let's refresh the page. The page has rendered the message written in the functions file. There's one thing I want to highlight. The message appears before the template. This behavior indicates the functions file gets loaded before the index template. It's important to take note of this. The template is the last thing that gets outputted. Code written inside the functions file has a higher priority. This behavior allows us to redirect visitors or throw an error. Let's go back to the editor to remove the echo statement. In the following lecture, we're going to write our first hook for adding scripts and style sheets.